This morning begins a two-part series on women in the Bible, and I do so hope that you can be here next week as well to listen to church member and former resident minister Dr. Deborah Forger share her scholarship from the New Testament on POV of women in the Bible. Today, we have with us church member, very committed, dedicated church member, about 2010.
Yes, yeah, very good.
Kate Silbert. And she is here with her historian's hat on today. And fun fact first about our Kate Silbert. I get so excited when we have church members do these presentations for us, because I just feel like it's so celebratory in a way that we get to know our members even a little bit better. I just there's something so exciting about that. So extra thank you for taking the invitation, I think last spring, to do this for us. Fun fact, Kate is Assistant Director of Opportunity Works at this time at the university, and this is her work that helps students discover the interests and talents that they have so that they can become or form a professional identity. But anyway, back to our historian here. Kate is, she has earned her BA in history from Mulberry College. Her master's
my mid friend over here.
From the University of Michigan, and she holds a doctorate of philosophy from the University of Michigan from within the Department of History and Women's Studies. So thank you so much. I do want to say before we get started that we just ask the Holy Spirit to be here and open our ears, and just grateful to be here together and listen and learn and be wiser pilgrims in this world. Okay, Kate Silbert.
Okay,
thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth. Sound is still good? Folks can hear me all right? Okay. Well, it's really good to be with you all. Many familiar faces. I joked as folks were coming in, I don't know if it's better or worse to have people I know well in the room. But I'm really glad to have all of you here, and grateful to Beth and the Adult Formation Committee for inviting me to do this. So the kind of theme I've chosen for us today is thinking about new lenses for viewing women in the Bible. And what I'm going to be inviting us to explore together is a little bit inward. We're going to be reflecting on our own experiences, some of our own lenses that we have brought to this topic. Our opening activity was getting us there. But also to potentially notice some things we haven't before through that reflecting on our lenses. And then we'll very briefly explore a couple of new lenses you might try and sit with. But before we do that, I want to first share a little bit about how I come to this work. Beth shared a little bit. But as I think about this topic in particular, for me, it's sort of some personal and professional. So I am a cradle Presbyterian, and I'm also a PK. Does anyone know what PK means? We have some PKs in the room. Okay, preacher's kid. These are the three preachers of my childhood. On the left, my grandfather, my dad's dad. On the right, my dad. And in the middle, my mom. Three Reverend Silberts. And my mom in particular really influenced how I come to this topic, how I come to my own faith. She worked full-time as an associate pastor at a Presbyterian church in my growing up. And so from birth, I had this example of women in leadership, women preaching the gospel, women inhabiting sort of the fullness of faith and its expression. So that's never been a question for me. And then on the other hand, I have these windows into some of the tension that my mom experienced in that role of woman and minister. And I'm going to share just one anecdote from childhood that gets at this a little bit. So in my childhood, we still had landlines. I'm in a room where I suspect you all know what a landline is. And we didn't have caller ID. So, you had to answer the phone and ask who was there. So my younger sister and I, early on, were sort of trained in how to do this. We were a house that received phone calls often, ministers, right? So here's an exchange. Hello, Silberts. Hello, this is insert male name, calling from, I later learned, somewhat conservative Christian organization. May I speak to Reverend Silbert? Innocence of babes? Which one? Reverend John Silbert. So that speaks to me, right, of this world that I've come to learn more, right, sort of that tension of women and women's interaction with the Bible, with women's preaching from the Bible, kind of how women have been seen, right, in church over time. So that's one real window into how I come into this work. But the other big influence for me is my scholarly training. So my scholarly formal training is not in theology. I got a good dose of it from this household growing up, but never went to seminary. I do not have background in classical languages, in the classical era. My training is in history and women's studies. And in particular, things that influence how I come to this topic, a particular focus on the relationship between readers and texts. So kind of breaking out of this idea that we have text fixed on a page that has universal, unchanging meaning. And this idea that it's always an interaction of the reader and that text. And even text, right? It doesn't come direct from the author to the reader. It has to go through an editor. It gets printed. There are great listicles. Do you all know what a listicle is? A listicle is an internet thing where there's just sort of a list of curious things to kind of draw you in. They're also kind of called clickbait sometimes. Great listicles out there about typos that have appeared in Bibles over time. So instead of sin no more, sin on more, right? So a whole web, right, of producers that help a text make it to us as a reader, and then how different our reading experience might be depending on where we are, who we are with. We know this so well in church, right? The meaning that it can hold to hear someone read from up front versus read responsively versus read silently. All maybe the same text of something like the Psalms, or even hear it sung. So that's one kind of key focus of my work in that PhD. Another is just about gender norms, right? So ideas about what it might mean to be a man or a woman, how those line up or don't with people's lived experiences, and also how those are subject to change over time. So those are kind of the points that bring me to what we're going to talk about today. So for our time today, I have some guiding questions for us, and I choose that word question deliberately because it's not my goal for you to leave with specific or concrete answers. I instead am inviting you today to spend time with these questions together and then potentially to take them with you coming out of our session together. So we're going to be talking about and spending some time with thinking about what lenses you bring to the topic of women, but more broadly gender in the Bible, thinking about where those lenses come from, and then briefly, as I said, paying attention to what comes into focus when you try some new lenses. All right, so with that, we are going to turn back to this opening question I asked and our sticky notes. So I posed this question as folks were coming in. What does the phrase women in the Bible bring to mind for you? So I'm going to go over here to our board, and we're going to take a look at kind of what ended up here. And we got a lot of good stuff here. I was going to try to put these together, but all right, I'm seeing everything from strong, undervalued, always there, not often named, mother, submissive, healer, afterthoughts, bringing their words, tearing their garments. Sometimes they are bad women, poor, women at the well. Oh. Jesus informed them first. Ignored in their time and for centuries afterwards. Finding the empty tomb. So there's a real mosaic here, right? Again, of some of these opposites. Undervalued, unknown, always there. Submissive, find the resurrection first, right? And I think that speaks to, again, what I hope we'll explore today, that this phrase, women in the Bible, this topic of women in the Bible is, it's a messy one. It's a messy one, and there's not a clear-cut sort of, it's all oppression or it's all celebration. Kind of like life. It's really a mix of all of those things. And so I'm going to invite us to dig a little deeper as we go in thinking about coming to our encounters with Scripture in the fullness of who we are as people, but also the ways that fullness, that messiness of who we are as people individually and in community really shapes our encounters with Scripture as well. All right, so we are about to do a quick exercise. If you have your sheet, you can find the note-taking space there. Make sure you have a pen. Beth has more sheets if anyone needs one. Thank you again, Beth, for that. All right, so you are going to have about 45 seconds to write. Again, go with your first impulse. This is get the most out there, all right? So I'm going to give you a prompt in just a second, and then I have a timer that I will start. So is everyone in a position where they are ready to write? Ready to write? Okay, I'm getting the signal that we're ready. Write down as many biblical figures as you can. 45 seconds, here you go.
Male or female? Female. Both.
First impulse, and as many as you can. Oh, it's about the... Okay, there's our timer. All right, how'd we do? We got a good number of names on there? Okay, I'm hearing some 12s, 10s. All right, count the first 10 if you got to 10 and draw a line. Nothing after that counts. Sorry, I was being a little tricky. All right, and maybe you know what's coming next. Of the 10, put a little star next to the people on that list that are women. Uh-oh, what do we put for God? That's a wild card. All right. So to be fair, I'm going to show you my list first. I really did this, and this was after I came up with this idea and after being steeped in this for months. Oops, not the timer. We do not want the timer again. Come on. I got 2 on my list. All right, so I want a show of hands in the room. How many people had at least one woman on their list of the first 10? I like it. Keep your hand up if it was 2 or more. 3 or more. 4 or more. 5 or more. All right, of our 5 or more, does anyone want to say, I think I got the most?
I had 9 women.
9 women. Yes. All right. So what I want to invite you all to do next is have some conversation about what is your reaction to your own results in doing this activity. What do you see as behind who ended up on your list, right? So when I went back to my list, I was like, well, I was sort of in a motion, right? Of like, let's start at the beginning, da 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 da, and then Moses sounds like Noah, sounds like, Moses leads to Jesus. James, once you say James, you're going to say John. But what factors, right, do you see as influencing? Who comes to mind first as you think about the Bible? And before we kind of break up into pairs or trios, just people near you to do that, I am going to invite you to look at the guidelines at the bottom of the handout, just because we are kind of turning inward and talking about our own experiences. I'm going to invite you to speak from your own experience primarily, kind of using I's where you can, really to honor the trust that's being extended to you when others share, including kind of asking their permission before sharing what they have shared, especially if it's, again, their experience. To lean into empathy and curiosity, really seeking to understand as you listen. And then the last thing I want to add, I didn't include it on the thing, is just to take care of yourself. So the church has not been immune from causing harm, especially when it relates to things like gender and gender identity, sexuality. So I'm inviting you to take care of yourself in the way that you need to as we talk today. All right, so I'm going to invite you to split up. We'll have about 5 minutes, and again, to talk through these two questions about kind of what are your reactions to as you did that list of 10, and what do you see behind who ended up on your list. Sound good? All right, so we'll take about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back together.
They don't know that.
Open a window or two.
That would be great.
If you see signs of like that, let me know.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
The sound is great.
Okay, good. Good. Take about one more minute. So if someone hasn't had a chance to share. All right, I'm going to invite us back. Finish the thought you're on. I'm going to bring us back together. Y'all are having good conversation. I'm going to bring us back together. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Beth. Beth, were you a K-12 teacher at any point? All right, well, I'd love to hear out from a few folks what came up as some of the factors or influences behind what you all shared. Lynn, you want to start us off, and then maybe Nancy?
Oh, and do give Bill a moment.
I'll try to repeat questions with the microphone, too, if that's helpful.
Thank you.
Or
Well,
comments?
I think it was Jenny who mentioned it. It was typical of those times. I mean, it's such a patriarchal society, especially Old Testament, but still New Testament and maybe on into toward the present. And so that women just were not raised up for the most part
Okay,
and
yeah.
allowed to participate in leadership.
Yeah, great. So some of it, the context of the era in which the Bible was written, the society at the time being patriarchal. Other thoughts, Helena?
Nancy and I talked about the same thing because both of us came from very conservative backgrounds where men were in charge, and we talked about in the denomination that my parents were in and I came from before I came to First Pres. Women, the first roles that they were given in the church were as a deacon, and they were servants and took care of people and did not have any leadership roles other than that.
Yeah. So there I'm hearing not just that the context of the Bible being written maybe was patriarchal, but then its manifestation or its expression in the churches of your childhood was patriarchal as well, right? Especially around things of leadership and what roles were open to women. Any other influences that came up? Yeah.
Well, the stories and the history was written by men.
Yeah. So the writers, the context of the creating, not just the story, but the context of how it was created as well.
And I think that the issue with how women are perceived to be accepted in the church, the more literal interpretations of Scripture dictate to the more conservative churches that that's God's expectation, it's God's design. And that's what, so the very literal reading says women should not serve over men, only men should serve in authority. So that's a big difference between something like our church and of conservative churches, because they take that very seriously, the position of women.
Yes.
And but there's a lot of, I think, negative experiences then for girls and women in that setting.
Yeah.
If I may say so.
Yeah. I want to say one thing in response to Nancy, and then Nikki, I'll come over to you. Yes. So Mikkel Beth Dinkler, I think is her name. She's PCUSA ordained, but also faculty at Yale Divinity School. Talks about how all of us as Christians need to get better at naming how are we reading this text, because often the disagreement of the meaning of that text is about our different reading practices and interpretation. And so being clear on how are we coming to this text. Nancy, what you were saying is like the extract it, apply it, right? Paul says this, therefore this. Paul, interestingly though, and this is, I think, Nancy, what I'm hearing there is this reflection of, in a lot of Paul's letters, this notion of the household codes that are present in those. I'm hoping Deb can speak more to this next week. But Paul also, I learned in reading, Paul uses more maternal imagery about nursing, birthing, than he does strictly paternal imagery. So even Paul, right, there's like a little more, it's a little messier than how Paul's words have often been handed down to us or kind of been part of our experience, right, and then what we take Paul to be and be saying. And then I'm hoping Deb can provide more context on the role of household codes just in the Roman context and how even Paul's version of those is different and a step beyond what would have been the norm of those household codes at the time. So yes. All right, Nikki.
Just two quick things of that. Like I grew up Catholic, where I started out being able to participate in church. Then we got a new pope, and I couldn't do anything in church anymore.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. But I was telling Prue, I got in a debate with a Baptist minister who said, nowhere in the Bible does it say women can be priests. And I told him nowhere in the Bible does it say women have to tithe either.
Oh. I like it. I like it. Tithe. Yes. I like it. Nikki, what I also want to highlight from your experience, right, is again, that ebb and flow that you experienced, right? So in your early childhood in Catholic Church, there was room for you. And then there was a change in leadership. And there was then a change in what the expectation was, and that was pulled back, right? And so again, that helps to illuminate how a lot of even the norms, the rules, are themselves fluid, let alone how well they match or don't match, our lived experience.
But Mary was very important in the church.
And that's another fascinating thing, right? That there's a lot of scholarship about actually with the Protestant Reformation, ways that women in some ways lose ground or visibility in the life of church communities because of the decentering of Mary, yeah.
Well, when you mentioned Mary, it seems to me though, she was so elevated, it wasn't real. I mean,
yeah, tell me.
they didn't see her as a real person. They saw her as chosen and blessed and
right.
way beyond anything we could ever be, and set apart.
Yeah.
I'm born on December 8th, so.
Sorry, what?
I'm born on December 8th, so me and Mary.
I'm not putting your down. They didn't see her as a real person with real feelings, with struggles, and.
And I was always bothered by why this Virgin Mary? Why?
Yeah.
If we're not virgin, are we not ever going to get on that pedestal ourselves?
Yeah. Oh, great. Thanks. Yeah, Sid.
The things that interest me, or some of the things that interest me, having taught women in the Bible a long time ago, from a feminist perspective, is the history of decisions on what books would be included and not included in various Bibles, like Esther's not included in the Protestant Bible, it is in the Catholic Bible, and she's a very powerful figure. And then the other thing that's important is who was literate, and where was knowledge being produced about, and where were the biblical interpretations being produced. What kind of institutions they were in, and the difference between how stories were conveyed visually in the cathedrals, for instance, rather than through textual analysis and exegesis.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry to just recap that, Sid was speaking to paying attention to kind of decisions over time about what would actually be in the Bible or not. And so again, for our tradition, Esther is in the version of the Bible we use now, but John Calvin, for instance, just leaves it out of his commentary. just like, we're not going there. And just, again, how the manifestations of Scripture, whether it's in text or also in its depiction, really influences what people are going to interpret to it, who has access to what stories, who's telling those stories. Yeah, Susan.
So hearing Sid speak, I wondered, were there women scribes? But then I started thinking earlier about how I perceive a lot of biblical stories, which has to do with the history of art. And women are typically portrayed, especially in biblical stories, but elsewhere, as not actors, not without any agency. They're looked at and done to pretty much. And in the instance of the Virgin Mary, you know, obviously she had a surrogate somewhere. But also, either that or emoters. You know, if you see a deposition scene, it's the women who are crying and tearing their garments and stuff, and the men are actually pulling the veils and all that. And so I think that gets reinforced too. Our ideas get reinforced through our history's interpretation of biblical stories.
I think that's a...
And then you get to Judith beheading Holofernes.
Yeah. Jail with the hammer, right? Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great bridge to where I want to go next. These are some things that came up as I was thinking about this, potential influences. Some similar to, but a little different from what we said so far. So who in the room watched the 10 Commandments as a child, perhaps, or a teen? Yeah. Yeah. So in our wider world, maybe it's not in the stained glass, right? Or just in the stained glass, but in our wider world, images of the Bible have been circulating, fixing in our minds. Those maybe signal to us what stories matter and don't matter in the Bible, which people matter and don't matter in the Bible, right? How about children's Bibles? These are two. The Children's Bible by Golden Press from 1965, which I actually think is kind of a beautiful cover. Didn't go inside, so I can't speak to what's in there. This one is one that my sister loved growing up. It's Zondervan, 1989. What are some things we notice about what's going on in here?
All white people.
All white people! Yeah. Like maybe passing as like Midwestern tan, but Midwesterns don't really tan.
That's why some people think that the actual historical figures were
Yes.
Northern European whites.
Yes.
With blue eyes.
Yes.
Blue eyes, yes. Tap hunter.
Yes, exactly. What else? People you recognize here? Biblical figures you recognize here?
Goliath.
We got Goliath, Jesus, Adam and Eve.
Two giraffes, 2 by 2.
We got, yeah.
There aren't very many women in there. There's one.
We got Eve. We got some kids, and then what's going on here? Is this Mary and Martha looking like June Cleaver and her friend with flowers?
The blonde hair is interesting.
Blonde hair, right, right. Yeah, mac and cheese for Jesus. He was a fan. There are more animal pairs on here than there are human women on here. It's something I noticed this morning.
On the right.
This guy? This is Goliath, I think. He's looking menacing. There's David.
Does your sister still like this Bible?
I doubt it. I doubt it. Interestingly, there's a newer edition of this from 2016. A little less white, a little less white. But these two are gone, so Eve is the only woman remaining on it in the newer one.
They were controversial, so instead of fixing it, they just took it out.
Took out Mary and Martha and mac and cheese.
Yeah. So other ideas that came to mind for me as I was thinking about this, again, just sort of the early ways we maybe took this in, Christmas pageants, children's songs in church. Zacchaeus was a wee little man. Who built the ark? Noah, right? Father Abraham.
Yeah.
And my mother's like feminist intervention of that was, we'll say had many kids, not many sons, right? But still, it's all about Abraham. So I guess I bring this forward, and you all have shared many of these other influences as well, to again just point us towards noticing what are things that have really shaped, even now, right? How we come to these stories of the Bible, how we come to thinking about women in the Bible, men in the Bible, people in the Bible. And if there's an opportunity for us to pay attention in different ways and come to new encounters with that. And so as kind of a counterpoint exercise, and it feels appropriate for the Sunday that we're celebrating All Saints' Day, if I were to ask you instead, who are the people in your life whose love and care nurtured your faith, helped you know God's love, would the gender balance have looked different than the list that you made?
Sunday school teachers.
Sunday school teachers.
They were women, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Grandmothers.
Grandmothers. Mothers, parents, yeah. Youth leaders, perhaps. Or not. Or not. But that tells us something, right? Our nurture of faith, our growing into a sense of God's love for us as God's children, called to share that love with others. If the gender is more imbalanced there and it's not in the Bible, that's telling us something about what God is really calling for us in the world. All right, so we're going to transition a little bit here. I think to kind of tie this up, this is Beth Allison Barr. She's actually writing from a white evangelical circle, and I'll say more about that in a minute. But she talks about how cultural assumptions and practices regarding womanhood are read into the text, rather than the biblical text being read within its own historical and cultural context. And that came out from several of you, right, of what it means to go back to that text and understand the context in which it was written, understand the intricacies of the languages in which it was written, right? And so again, I'm putting in a plug. Come back next week where Deb Forger, who really studies this era, can dive deeper into that with you. But I think, again, a first step for us is that paying attention, checking in on our own vision, noticing our current lenses, and from there, kind of going back into that text, understanding its historical or cultural context, but also just, again, paying attention to what haven't I been noticing before? What can I disrupt in my own thinking as I come to this text or as I'm hearing words of the liturgy that help me think more broadly, maybe get away from solely masculine God talk, right? Quick exercise, this comes from Angela Rio, former resident minister. She went to McCormick Theological Seminary, and they had a rule that they were not allowed to refer to God as he. So that's a practice, right? To catch yourself and plug in, I'm going to say God, not he. God, him, God, self, right? It's an interesting practice I can speak to from the experience of having tried it after she shared that. All right, so very briefly, started a little late. Well, okay, we started a little late, and do we normally end at noon?
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm going to invite you to do is on the back side of your handout are some ideas for further reading and listening. We're not going to go very deep on these topics, but these are some new lenses to try. And if you've been to the eye doctor, you know, they're like, side one, side two. I had my first experience of getting tested for lenses, and the 1, 2 were really hard. So eventually the doctor was like, 1, 2, 3, 4. But it's a testing process, right? When we come to a new lens, we have to kind of see how it measures up. It might take us a while to get used to it, but the purpose behind it is to help us see more clearly. So as you maybe take a look at some of these new lenses, I'm going to shout out some ways you could explore further. I invite you to kind of embrace that thing. Okay, so one would be womanist and black feminist perspectives on the Bible. They say it's not enough to just look at the cultural context. We also need to measure this against black women's experiences in the world and the way this text has been used to justify subjugation and oppression. And can we read a vision of liberation into this text? So on your sheet, work by Katie Geneva Cannon, the late Katie Cannon, Presbyterian, but kind of a foremother in the field of womanist ethics and theology. Also a follow-up piece by Monica Coleman, slightly younger Black feminist scholar, talking about some of the tensions even within that process as it relates especially to sexuality and gender identity. But really, womanism, Black feminism is about bringing the text into conversation with the present social and political moment as well. And really, again, kind of seeing how the Bible's text lines up with that. And where necessary, sort of discarding, right? Taking out of the sacredness, things that are human in the ways that they are curtailing of people's existence and fullness as humans. The other one I'll invite you to explore more is sort of gender expansive, gender affirming thinking. This is very present among queer activists and scholars, especially in the transgender community. And so they are looking at where the Bible makes room for more expansive ideas about men and women, kind of beyond that binary. More expansive ideas about gender diversity and the expression of that. Very briefly, they talk about, a typical feminist reading of Genesis 1 would be male and female together in tandem at the beginning created. Gender expansive thinkers would say male and female in one being. Really understanding the fullness of gender diversity and expression as being part of that initial creation from God. So, yes, Sid. Well, I was just going to say, if you're interested in learning more about that, there are two pieces on here. One is the Evolving Faith podcast, a series of speakers, but there was a recent episode in season 1 about a collection of transgender theologians kind of digging into this more and saying more about that biblical context. As well as a piece from the Human Rights Campaign by some of those same authors. Sid.
One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is the problem with kind of always going back to a kind of engagement with a God that is an anthropocentric God, and which means it's a God in our own image. It's not
Yes.
God made
Yes.
us in His image. We made God in our image.
Yes.
And so I wonder if you've seen anything that kind of just takes that out of and says, this is only one way of thinking about or imagining what this thing we call God is.
Yeah, right. And God, when asked who God is, says, I am what I am. Right? So yes, I think Tikva Frymer-Kensky on that list, Jewish and Hebrew scholar, has done a lot on there's an essay she has about revisiting God talk.
Yeah.
And so that would speak to that a little bit.
Which one is that?
Oh, it's Tikva Frymer-Kensky, Rereading the Bible. Yep. And just other work of hers too would be in that vein. Trying to think what else. And then honestly, Sid, some of the like more recent transgender thinking is a lot in that vein too, of God is bigger than our understanding of a gender binary, of right, even our humanity. So yeah. Yeah. Yes.
And just if you just look up there, God is not just. It says, "Let us make humankind in our image."
Right.
So isn't God like multi,
Yeah.
faceted?
Yeah.
And why does it have to be male? And why does it have to be any gender at all? And why can't
Yeah.
it be like a vibration, right?
Yeah.
Or something non-physical?
Yeah.
Kind of makes more sense, actually, I think, in today's context.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You never heard that in your Bibles in Sunday school.
Right. Yeah. All right. So I want to close us down a little bit. As I was working through this work kind of over the summer and exploring in some new directions for me, honestly, to get kind of deeper into some of this theological discussion, I was thinking a lot about the first half of this, right? We see through a mirror dimly, like, oh yeah, I'm a little dim. But the follow-up also, right? Then, in the kind of future coming of reunion and the fullness with God, I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. 1 Corinthians 13, many of us know from weddings. This is love is patient, love is kind. This scene and knowing is under the arc of that call to love, and the greatest of these is to love. To zoom out a little bit more, we didn't talk about the story of Hagar, but Hagar is a central figure among Black feminist and womanist theologians in terms of women in the Bible. Hagar has the distinction in the Hebrew Bible of being the only person who gives God a name. And it happens after she has been mistreated at the hands of Abram and Sarai because she is pregnant with Abram's son, Ishmael. And Sarai is jealous of that, and there's all this complication, right, of Abram cannot get the message of what this promise from God is. So Hagar runs out into the wilderness, she runs away, and God meets her there and kind of reestablishes a promise for her, very much akin to Abram's. And it's a messy one because God also says, go back to these people who have mistreated you. But God calls her by name, and again, casts this promise for her. And Hagar calls God, I'm going to butcher the Hebrew, I'm sure, but it's El Roi, and it means the God who sees me. So again, I want to kind of conclude us with thinking about, we've been talking about lenses and seeing and knowing and loving, and the ways that we are called through the example of God, through the example of Jesus, right? Now, a number of you named how Jesus' interactions with women are a little different from some of the other things in the Bible, that we are called into that work ourselves. And so a couple of closing invitations you might carry with you from today. What have your lenses brought into focus? What or who? What or who have your lenses obscured? And what new stories and meanings and promises is God calling you to see in the Bible or elsewhere? And with that, I'm going to say thank you so much for joining today's discussion.
So appreciative of your time. Lovely, organized presentation as a historian who eats, sleeps, drinks, and breathes, researches, and knows how to dive in. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Giving us some cues.
Yeah, you're all.
We would like to present you with this little gift.
Thank you so
as
much.
a token of our
Thank
appreciation.
you.
And thank you for coming.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you all. Thank you all for the great thoughts and ideas.
Thank you.